Hey, welcome to Silicon Heartland Sessions, the podcast where we celebrate the incredible leaders who make the Silicon Heartland a hub of innovation, collaboration, and growth. Today, we're honored to have with us a true legend in the technology community, someone who's often referred to as the Godfather of IT. Our guest, Angelo Mazzocco, has had a storied career holding nearly every major leadership position in the tech world, including CIO, CTO, CISO, COO, and even CEO. He's currently serving as Vice President of Advisory Services at AVAP, and Angelo continues to shape the industry with his wisdom, experience, and visionary leadership. So thanks for joining me today, Angelo.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. And wow, that's quite an introduction. If you can write that out for me, I want to keep it with me.
You got it. I
And
will send it over.
because I would love to have my wife say that about me one time. It's amazing. So,
Well, I'll tell you what. I understand that in January you have some news. Sounds like you're on the retirement path.
well, I think that, when you're 65, they start talking about retirement. And I turned 65 quite some number of years ago. So, a little secret. And so I did decide on January 1st to quote retire. But, today's retirement is very different from the old time retirement. I'm not at all going to be doing nothing. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be helping four different organizations with some business development work. And I'm excited to do that. And, certainly one of them is going to be AVAP, who I've really had a wonderful time working with the past almost 4 years now. And of course, that's a gang that I had the opportunity. They were one of the first companies I was on the board
Hmm.
of when they were called Navigator Management Partners. So,
Right. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
that's excellent. Congratulations. I mean, I can't think of a better way to retire. Retire into doing something that you're very, very passionate about and that you enjoy.
And the way I see it is instead of doing 8 to 12 hours a day, I'll be trying to do 4 to 6.
There you go.
And spending more time in the gym,
Yes.
which of course this morning I did. So,
Awesome.
and it wasn't just because we were doing this. So,
Excellent. Excellent. That's great. And Angelo is also the founder of the CIO Forum, which is a platform that has empowered countless CIOs and technology leaders to share ideas, build connections, and advance the profession. So we're going to hear more about the forum and Angelo, your mission to creating lasting impact through community and mentorship. So really excited to get into those topics. So, just as a reminder, we're going to be talking about three themes today with Angelo. We're going to be talking about personal, professional development, and wellness. Exploring Angelo's career journey, habits for success, and how he fosters creativity and balance. Leadership and community impact, uncovering lessons from your mentorship experiences, decision-making strategies, and approaches to inspiring others. And then we're going to talk about technology and ethical innovation. We discussed how technology, including AI, is reshaping wellness, leadership, and creativity. So, Angelo, your insights and stories are sure to inspire and empower everyone listening. So, thanks again for joining me today. So let's jump right into the conversation.
you're welcome. Yes.
So let's start with your career. You have had like one of the most remarkable and storied careers in IT leadership. Could you share some of the diverse roles that you've held and some of the pivotal moments that have shaped your path?
I love talking about this. This is one of my favorite topics because I've not walked the straight path. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, where most people worked in the steel mills, and most people worked in the steel mills for their entire life. Um, Most of their careers were spanning 40, 45 years until they retired or until they passed. And I remember going through a very bad downturn in the steel industry, and that shaped a lot of my career. In the 70s, what had happened was all my relatives who worked in the mills and were so happy that they were going to be getting their big pension found themselves on the short end of the stick when steel went under,
Hmm.
literally went under. And the US started buying most of its steel from overseas. And so most of my relatives who worked in the mills and friends all lost their pensions. And from the get go, it always kept me mindful about corporate America. And so, I want this to be positive, but on the other hand, I did start out that way, thinking that you need to be careful. You
Mm.
need to make sure that you're walking the trail that you think is important for your career. But I did believe in going to college. I was one of the first in my family to go to college. Went to school in Pennsylvania, studied mathematics and computer science. Had a love for actuary, which was in a modern day term for insurance.
Mhm.
And um, at that time, when you sat for the actuarial exam, it isn't like today when you know immediately when you take it what your outcome is. So I had to wait about 3 months. And coming from a blue collar Western Pennsylvania town, I wasn't going to wait 3 months to start my job. So I took a job in Dayton, Ohio at NCR
Mhm.
and worked there as a developer and worked my way up to sort of a programming supervisor. And I think many of us started that way and worked up through that that career trail, and really enjoyed it. Um, sure enough, 3 months later, I get my results, and I would have bet the house on it that I did not pass any of the three, and sure enough, I passed all three.
Nice. That's
So now
excellent.
I'm getting all this attention from insurance companies.
Mhm.
So I decided to go to work at Nationwide, and
Okay.
that's what brought me to Columbus. I
Mhm.
had a love for life and health insurance. Growing up, my mom had died at a very young age. My dad was hard of hearing, ran his own little business, and I used to sort of be his insurance guy at the age of 16. And the thing about it was in those days, you really had to watch the insurance guy because um, you know it, at least I saw my father getting taken advantage of as being hard of hearing, and I would jump into conversations and say, "Hey, wait a second,
Wow.
let's go back through that. I know my dad can't hear very well." So
Wow.
it created a chip that I have today, with certain things. But when uh, when I was at NCR treated me very well. I had an opportunity to get an MBA at the University of Dayton, and I think that really molded my beyond tech career. I think everybody in IT has a penchant for the technology aspect.
Right.
And somebody told me one time, don't forget about the business side. And that MBA did a ton to help me because it it was a point in time where I was concerned why the company I was working for didn't have the latest and greatest in technology. Well, then I got my MBA and all of a sudden realized that there's this return on investment, and that if everybody
Right.
just bought the biggest and best and greatest, would all be broke. So
Very
those
true.
are things that I really didn't understand until I went to grad school
Mhm.
and learned that there. So here I am coming into Columbus, Ohio, 1982. Columbus was the 32nd largest city in the
Hmm.
US. Of course,
Mhm.
today it's the 13th. And
A
so
lot of growth.
that growth, and believe me, a lot of the folks watching this show right now are responsible for that. I feel I'm responsible. Sean, you're responsible. We've really done some things pretty magical in this marketplace to help that.
Agree.
And I would probably still be at Nationwide because of the love that I had for insurance. But I had an opportunity to go to Anderson Consulting, today
Mhm.
called Accenture,
Yep.
to be one of their leads in the insurance market. And I did both insurance and banking and worked with organizations like Bank One, which is now part of Chase, and the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Comp, and Nationwide. And so I just really got a great opportunity. I also worked with organizations outside of Ohio and across the country, and just loved it. Um, at that point in time, a lot of the companies, including Accenture or Anderson Consulting, were changing the way that they were doing business. Instead of being just geographically based as they had been. So what that meant was for years I had worked in Columbus and didn't have to worry about going anywhere else except for maybe doing a QA review or going out and helping some organization in California or something, but coming back. Well, they decided that they were going to organize by industry. And so my industry, which was financial services, which included banking and insurance, was going to be based out of Chicago. And sure enough, that would mean that more than likely I would have gone to Chicago. So I remember coming home and telling my wife, we had three children that were in junior high at that time. And um, I told my wife, I said, well, looks like we may be going to Chicago. And she said, we'll see ya. So,
No way.
and my wife was from Detroit originally, and I'm
Mhm.
from Western Pennsylvania, but we had both grown to love Columbus, and so I decided on the spot that I would go out and look, and had a good friend who had started in those days it was a true startup called
Mhm.
NC Group.
Hmm.
We grew it like crazy and sold it to Compicom out of Dallas, and that was my first time where I was part of a sell, a grow and sell. And I got in that habit because it happened again and again and again. And after that company got sold, I had the opportunity to become the CIO. First time I was a CIO for the dispatch companies, which everybody thought of it as just the Columbus Dispatch, the newspaper, but
Right.
it really included a whole lot more, 22 different companies: TV, radio, newspaper, real estate, aviation, agriculture, real estate, you name it. It seemed like we were in that business. And that's where the CIO Forum began to get growth. And the reason was that I had so many different types of organizations that I had responsibility for, that this fear started to come over that one day I said, "What would happen if our aviation system went down?"
Mm.
And I remember one of the first CIOs that I went and invited to the forum was Alan Collop. He was the first CIO I knew at NetJets,
Mhm.
and he became part of the forum. And I was like, "Oh, great! If anything goes down with aviation, um, Alan will be able to help us out." So a lot of what the forum was initially
Mhm.
was sort of a self-help amongst the group. And I remember the first meeting only having about eight people at that meeting, but of course today there's over 200. Let me come back to that, but let me finish first. Um, you know, when the dispatch sort of indicated to me that they were going to sell, by this time I had decided that selling, unless you're the owner, it's not necessarily going to benefit you the most. So I had been getting a lot of attention from a gentleman in Westerville called Dave Bianconi. He was the owner of Progressive Medical. He was just a whiz entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And I decided to go there to be his first CIO. And we grew that company tremendously.
Right.
And today it's part of Optum. It is now part of, the
Wow.
largest workers' comp system in the country. And we just had great people. That's where, Ben Blancaro was part of that team. We had just a ton of all stars. Jeff
Right.
Haskett. I can go on and on. And we were really blessed. And at that time too, um, we had brought in Pillar technology to help us with, getting into the agile space,
Right.
and it worked very well. Well, right at this time, Dave tells us, "I've got to sell the company. I'm getting an offer that I just can't refuse," and none of us could, blame him.
Mhm.
So sure enough, he sold the company. And I had the opportunities, knowing the pillar guys and the owner. He wanted me to go over and be the president and try to work into a CEO type role.
Mhm.
And went very well. So worked there. And then um, it was not long after that that um, the owner decided that he might want to sell, particularly to essentially he sold to Accenture,
Mhm.
and and that went that way very well. And I went with the physician group, Central Ohio Primary Care,
Right. I remember
and
that.
yeah. So um, a big reason for going to COPC was that my sister had just passed. She was 13 years older than me,
Mhm.
and she really passed prematurely. It had to do with the fact that she had an issue that was taken care of at one hospital over in Western Pennsylvania, and then some years later had another issue that was taken care of at a different hospital. But that hospital, they didn't have the information exchange set up in Pennsylvania yet between the hospitals. So
Right.
the second
Really.
hospital didn't know, and so essentially she died as a result of that. And
Mm.
I knew that COPC, since they don't own a hospital, they very much depend on what the hospital's information says. So what they would do is if you would go to them as a patient and they find out you were at, Mount Carmel or at Ohio Health or OSU, they would contact them to make sure they had the latest information. Well, they also began to drive a process called CliniSync, where all the hospitals in Ohio would exchange information so that the other hospitals and doctors would know. So um, I sort of cut the deal that I would be their CIO. Later, I even became their CISO. But then what I wanted in return was to be on the board of CliniSync so that I could then do something that my sister could be thought of, at least in my mind,
Yeah.
as being the reason that this is now a good thing to have.
Something
So,
wonderful coming out of that, the
yeah,
untimely passing of your sister
yeah.
and that. Yeah, that's
And
wonderful.
then just to close the loop on it, I worked at 3SG, which 3SG Plus, which they were a group of folks that I had known for many many years, and and then finally AVAP, AVAP being the original um, group called Navigator Management Partners, and I had the opportunity to be on their board, and it was just a great place. And by the way, along the way, I, I've been on a ton of for profits, nonprofits. I'm currently the chair of American Heart Association,
Okay.
which by the way um, is as much work as a full time job, I think, on some
Wow.
days. But the one thing I did retire from too was teaching. I had taught at Ohio State for 7 years, and then for 25 years at Otterbein. So, so that gives you the whole sort of spectrum. And when I compare it back to my uncles and my father, where they had one company they served for their entire life, I I thought differently. I felt that we now were carrying our own pension through our own 401k. I felt that I would work my first half of my career, my first 20 some years, doing what you're supposed to do, learning all the, development, database, project management, all the things that you need to have. But when I reached the second half, I started to do things based on passion.
Yes.
Those things that I felt in my heart, like doing what I was able to do at Central Ohio Primary Care
Right.
for my sister, or some of the other things of working with Pillar, where we were just able to do some extraordinary things and grow a company that was based in Ann Arbor and Columbus, and grew it across the country. It was
Mhm.
just remarkable how we were in Silicon Valley and we were in Des Moines, Iowa, and
Mhm.
just go on and on and on. So
Okay.
um, so those are the hot things. And Sean, you probably wanted to ask some questions, so I apologize. I
No, it's all
probably left you
good.
out of it.
No, it's all good. This is great. I really appreciate you taking us through your career. And to be honest with you, I have a lot of questions, but there's one thing that I wanted to say. I really think that there is an invaluable lesson in this story, and there's a kind of a thread that I wanted to pull, and it goes back. It starts back when you were in Dayton working at NCR. I think you mentioned the term superpower earlier, and there's without a doubt one of the things that makes our region, the Silicon Heartland, and everything so special is our ability to collaborate. And you certainly have been an amazing thought leader, when it comes to collaboration and thing. But the whole idea behind the CIO forum is to bring folks together in a collaborative way to share ideas, to help solve problems and so forth, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But I kind of go back to your passion for, it seems to me, your passion is really at the intersection of technology and business, which I would imagine is the thing that inspired you, when you were working at NCR. And back then I would imagine it was all about technology in your mind and everything, but you saw something that other people may not have seen, and other people I think today in technology don't see, which is why you went down the path of getting your MBA. There is tremendous value in being able to come to a company and not only bring the technology capabilities and so forth, but being able to connect those technology solutions to the why. And that really resonated when you were talking about Central Ohio Primary Care and what you did in the memory of your sister. It feels to me like you're the kind of leader that's really driven by the why.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you know, the worst thing you can do to me is say, just do this. And,
Yeah.
I need to figure out why. And then, as I like to think I'm a leader. I was a better leader than doer. You know, because I know I had some leaders who got frustrated with me because I wasn't as good a doer
Right.
as I was as a leader. Believe me, I know many, especially in the tech environment. We have such great technology people. It's unreal.
Hmm.
And so I would never stand up to them at all. But I think as a leader, I could convince a lot of those tech people to do the work based upon an understanding as to why we're doing it
That,
and
yeah, that's so
how it
powerful.
relates to the business.
That's so
So,
powerful.
and here's where along the way, you gave me way too many accolades. I have been so lucky, I feel in my mind, because as as I took over the dispatch, and I remember having worked with a guy back at Little NC Group, a guy that said, if I was ever in a CIO role, I would try to bring all the CIOs together as big a scope as I could and get them all talking together. And I thought, how smart is that?
Yeah.
That is so smart. Well, you have to have a reason. It's back to what could be the reason.
Hmm.
Well, how lucky could it be that I start working at the dispatch in 1997 going into 1998?
Hmm.
And that's my first CIO role. And guess what's happening in 2000? Because quite frankly, when I went around door to door to all the CIOs, and that's literally what I did back in those days,
I believe it.
there weren't a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of interest.
Right.
But then I came back and said, well, wait a second. We got this thing called Y2K coming up.
Hmm.
That's going to be here in 2 years. How many are done with their testing and their development? Of course, nobody was.
Yeah.
I said, we need to get together. So that became the stepping block for the CIO forum. And, a lot of things came after the CIO forum too, which I'll mention later too.
Hmm.
And thank God for people like, Steve Greeter and
Hmm.
Ben Mike Care and Mike Farrar and on and on and on and on. But what that hit the trigger was CIO having for CIO forum was having everybody rally around Y2K.
Hmm.
That was one of those things that around 97, 98, everybody was not quite sure. We had all begun our plans, but I remember somebody calling me saying, "Hey, how far are you taking the testing?" I'm like, "Boy, that's a good question.
Really good
How
question.
how far are you gonna take the testing?" Right? And so go ask somebody at Nationwide. I think you're gonna get a different answer than somebody at Grange or someone at, up the road at, DHL.
Mhm.
So that was a great rallying call because we all sat down and focused on Y2K.
Mhm.
And that's why AI is so important to this discussion too, because every few years we've had something like that. Maybe not as big as AI, but we've had Y2K. And right after Y2K went live and we were all either lucked out or very successful, guess what was the next thing that happened, right? We had 9/11.
Mm.
And so,
Very
and
true.
then it seemed like 2 years after that, we had a major outage, power outage across the Northeast, Ohio and the Northeast United States. And so we always seem to have something that the CIOs could get together about. And the more bad things that would happen, well, then we'd start getting phone calls from Cincinnati or we'd get phone calls from Cleveland saying, "Hey, you guys still getting together? Maybe we ought to come down and join your session for once or twice." I know we'd have the Dayton guys, the Cleveland guys and gals, and the Cincinnati, and at one point Pittsburgh as well. So,
Okay.
so a lot of this stuff, I was blessed, and I got a lot of the accolades. But believe me, it was the circumstances of what was happening in technology.
Mhm.
Every few years we were getting something that, oh my gosh, and they were some of them looked like they were going to be disastrous.
Yeah.
I remember, for the dispatch having to set up a trailer where all mail had to be looked at before with people that were in hazmat uniforms before it went to the people themselves because we were so afraid that there were things in the mail that could have caused problems. So, and this went on and on and on, where there were things that would come up every few years, and it was something in the technology. And even going back to when I think of my days at Nationwide, that's when we went through the whole transition to the internet,
Mm, yep.
and it was like, oh my god, what's going to happen here? Well, Joe over there doesn't need to carry the tapes to Huntington Bank anymore
Yep.
or to Chase, right?
Mhm.
Or back then it was Bank One, because every day we had somebody carrying the tapes with all the transactions on it and all that. But
Yeah.
now that we went to the internet, then it's like, wow, you know, hacking wasn't that prevalent.
Mhm.
But I think those are, some of the key pieces that I wanted to get across about the forum.
Yeah.
After the forum, um, I've always managed to have great people around me. Um, I remember getting a phone call from one of the CIOs. Her name was Jody Davids. She was the CIO at Cardinal.
Mhm.
And she said, "Hey, I heard that, you can't fit any more people in the CIO forum." Because we used to use the conference room uh, down at the dispatch, and it only fit
Mm.
40. And she said, "How can you keep me out? I'm the largest company in Ohio, Cardinal is, and you're going to leave me out." I said, "No, you can come. You can come. So we'll make it 41."
There you
But
go.
but the idea was that we couldn't grow much more. I didn't want to spend a lot of money. The whole thing was, the dispatch paid for everything about the
Mhm.
first 10 years
Wow.
because it would just be lunch, it would be parking, and in a conference room. So at that point in time, we decided we were going to do a 1-day event that today is called CIO Tomorrow, but
Mhm.
it's been called, you know, I think 4 different names over the years. and it's been great. And so now,
Yep.
and we've had help in underwriting. Tech Columbus helped us at first, and then Don DePero over at when he was at Business First, and
Hmm.
that's now carried on with Nick Fortini, and that's been a great help in getting all of the tech people and the CIOs, and now even beyond the CIOs, because now we have CDOs, we have CISOs, we have so many brilliant people,
Right.
and they all can participate. And now we're getting to where we're over 500 people. We're getting bigger and bigger with that group. So I remember too one day Ben Blanquera saying, "Hey, we should have tech strategy sessions,
Right.
all around town." And I said, "Ben, do you realize how much work that's going to be?" And he said, "Yeah, but the programmer needs to know this stuff as much as the project manager." And I said, "You're right, but you know what? Good luck." And you know what, Ben and some other folks like Steve Greeter and others took that concept and created something that I've never heard any other town do it to the extent we've done it.
I same.
And that is to take top to bottom anybody in technology, get them in a room, and it's not unusual to see a CIO, a CTO, a CEO
Hmm.
talking with a programmer. And how now, when you talk about breaking down the tech and business problems, that's the way to do it, right?
Right.
You get a programmer talking to a CEO or a CIO, things change because now that developer is going to understand the business much better and do an even better job than what they were doing before.
Hmm. Yeah. Angelo, that is an inspiring story. And if the one thing I will say that I'm sure everybody will agree with is you have tremendous humility. And as you're telling this story, and you're talking about all these things that have been done in the community, and you're giving credit to other people for giving you the idea for the CIO forum, and how smart that is, and of course, there you've been blessed with some lucky circumstances and things like that, but you're the one that took that idea and wrapped a why around it to say, hey, look, we're gonna come together within the context of this looming challenge, Y2K coming, and we're gonna, build the CIO forum to help uplift us so that we can all work on this together. Now that is brilliant. I would argue that all of these great, wonderful things, all those seeds that you planted way back then, I don't want to make it seem like it was forever. Obviously, it wasn't, back in the 80s and 90s and so early 2000s. Those seeds that you planted are now blossoming in these full, array of these beautiful, what we consider the community. The CIO Tomorrow conference is a direct result of that. Tech strategy is a direct result of that. Your leadership and guidance and helping other folks to see the importance of wrapping these ideas into a why so that we can make it meaningful, is absolutely brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. I think there's a tremendous lesson there for everybody.
Well, thank you. And there was one I'm always hesitant to mention, but I had such great people that I worked for, and
Hmm.
one of them was John Wolf, the publisher, the owner of all the dispatch companies, and he was right there with us because I remember him saying, what's it going to take to do this CIO forum thing, and I laid it out, a little bit of costs, and then with CIO tomorrow, the same thing. And he just thought it was the greatest thing because he was driven by community. And I think that that's where I was so lucky. Had I not been working for John and at the time, some of the other folks at the organization, um, it would have been all tech thought. But
Right.
with John, it was about community. He wanted to know, how does this help the community?
Right.
How does it help the community? Because, if I'm going to help you with the costs, I want to make sure that other companies are going to benefit too. This
Hmm.
isn't just a dispatch thing. So, you know, it was, I think, 2 years to the day, I think around 2001, that John and Les Wexner created the partnership. And that's the part I'm always hesitant to say. I've never really said it publicly, but I am
Okay.
now
Awesome.
saying that it would have been easier if that would have gone first. But because we didn't really have a model, but we were making that model, talking to John, talking to some of the other. Jim Gilmore was the CFO, and they had great ideas. Well, it's should be no surprise that a couple years after, they turn around and create the partnership, which I believe has become the pure key from a business standpoint to what's happening when you talk about, some of the growth that Columbus is going through, and some of the unbelievable tech startups now that are happening, and everybody else who's coming in to the Columbus area.
Hmm. I would agree.
Because, I think there's something about having Huntington talking to Ohio Health, talking to, name the next one, Nationwide, and
Hmm.
it's like, gosh, like when the collaboration was there, it just was, what a synergy
Hmm.
for a city to have.
Right. Wow. Well, when you think about, all the years that you've been doing this and building the community and all the influence and impact you've had on all the companies that you've been a part of, I mean, that's quite a legacy that you're building. And as you kind of look back and you think about, how you've sort of, embarked on this journey, are there, habits or practices that have been instrumental in like driving your success over the years?
I think that how we varied over, because you realize at one point I had the numbers figured out as to how many CIO forums and CIO tomorrows. CIO tomorrows we've had, I think, around 24. So
Hmm.
if you take the CIO forum that happens 10 times a year, and we've been doing it since '97, so that's 27 years. So that's um, 270 meetings. So, and I could tell you that what we tried to do was be very creative in what the discussion points are. I know today the forum is more about a specific organization. Like we might take a look at Grange and say,
Right.
what's Grange doing, and what cool things are they doing that's impacting not only Columbus but the country and the world.
Right.
So but there was a time when it was just more topical. It was based upon, like, right now we're spending more time on AI, but the forum would have spent probably a whole year of meetings just talking about AI and what organizations are doing and should be doing as it relates to AI. So I
Hmm.
think that that's been a change,
Right.
and a good one
Hmm.
in that regard. Now, who'd have known that you've got these organizations all around town? ABB. It's like probably one of the greatest engineering firms in the country.
Right.
So, or DHL, their North America operation is here.
Right.
It's like, oh my god, and Honda.
Hmm.
So I go on and on and on. It's just amazing.
Hmm.
We're really blessed. We really are.
Yeah, but you're the point is that you see all of this great talent, these great companies as more opportunity to collaborate.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that.
I
I love
I
that.
I agree, and I remember being so overwhelmed when Jeff Smith, who was one of the CIOs at P&G, called back, in the '90s and said, "Hey, you mind if we come up and sit in on some of your meetings, because we want to figure out how to do this."
Hmm.
Or when another gentleman from Dayton did the same thing, and so I think that it not only then began to spread through invitations that we had, but also through other cities and even other states who began to see what we were doing and see the
Mhm.
value of it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So with your demanding career and everything you do in the community and everything, how do you, maintain a balance between your work and your personal life?
You know, gosh, that's a tough question, but I did have that realization. I think when I went towards the dispatch and moved away from Accenture, work at the dispatch was difficult, but it was manageable. You know, compare that to when I was at Accenture. Now I was lucky I didn't have to travel all that much, but when I did, I mean,
Mhm.
you were gone for days at a time.
Oh, yeah.
And guess what? If you were gone at a time that your kid was in the play, tough. You missed it.
Yeah.
So when when I went and worked with the Wolves, that was the best thing I ever did because they are a family committed to families, and we were able. I remember Mr. Wolf and Mr. Gilmore saying, "You should never miss any of your kids' events." And I took that to heart. So it was from that point on in my career that I've never missed anything significant.
That's awesome.
And I think that that's something that you should consider. And I just talked to a young gentleman today who's going through that, saying, do I want to go to work for Deloitte or Accenture, or do I want to go maybe to a smaller company where I have a little more say? And we got into this discussion on family. How at one point are you considering a family and things like that? Because you know I think there's nothing worse than if your kid graduates from school and says, "Gosh, Dad never was able to make it to my baseball game or to my band
Yeah.
concert." And that was something that somebody told me early on, and I just decided that I would not do it. And also to not spoon feed your kids, but
Hmm.
sort of shove them from the side. All
Mhm.
three of our kids worked for the Big Four. That was
Right.
their first job,
Mhm.
and to me, that's the best way to go. I think if I mean, I wouldn't give up the opportunity I had at Nationwide and NCR, but
Yeah.
if I went out of pace with anything, it was that I didn't do Accenture first
Mm.
because you just learn all the basics.
Right.
I really had to relearn a lot of things because, the Big Four and there are others too, Slalom and other organizations where they really teach you, you know, sort of the ABCs.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like, working for GM or Honda or Ford, in building cars. That's what they do. So, um, so I think that it's very important that you understand your priorities. And gosh, I can't tell you how many people I hear it from where, gosh, I took this job, it pays great, but I'm never home.
Yeah.
And so anyway, and also, I'm lucky. My wife and I have been together for 42 years. I have no idea how that happened. It just does. And 42 years, it's sort of amazing. But she is an angel.
I believe
We
it.
met in the IT
Mhm.
world. She's a geek at heart. That's what I call all us tech people. We're
Yeah.
all tech geeks at heart.
Yep.
And you know, uh, if she were home right now, she would be right over there working on some sort of spreadsheet for herself or working on something related to that. And um, so I think it's important that you take a notice.
Mhm.
And I learned some tricks about how to get a job in the Big Four, and there are some simple tricks that can get you in. And I gave those tidbits to my kids and other kids. The gentleman I talked to earlier today, I said, if you do end up wanting to go to Accenture, here's what you want to do. The best way in is to get an internship with them.
Yeah.
And because you know what? The bigger the company, the bigger their financial focus. And so if you're doing a good job, they're not going to want to get rid of you.
Hmm.
It doesn't make the ROI cut. So really, if you want to get a job like that, go in as an intern, especially if you're fresh out of college or in college. And then when do you apply for your internships? Right, it's before the first of the year.
Right.
So anybody has questions on that, give me a call, and because all I want everybody in our market and across the country to do as best as they can. And these
Yeah.
are things that because I I had a lot of luck, but you know, by the time I got to Accenture, I had already been at 2 jobs, and I didn't know these kind of rules that, they pick interns at certain points and
Hmm.
things of that sort. So,
Yeah.
those are the things that can really benefit.
Hmm.
I you know, I always like being well-rounded.
I can see that.
I love I could have very easily, I think, gone the healthcare route. I could
Hmm.
have loved being a physician. I could have stayed in insurance. I remember in high school, our teachers asked for us to explain what you would do when you graduated from college if you were going to go to college. And back then, you asked that question because a lot of people just went right to the mills.
Mm.
And I remember saying, "Well, I either want to be an actor
Okay. Yeah.
or a math teacher in insurance or in insurance with math.
Hmm.
Um,
Teaching
yep,
actuarial
yep,
science. Yeah.
or technology."
Yeah.
And I remember that teacher saying, "Wow, those are very different." And
Yeah.
so that's where I think that I've always had a wide array of interests. I couldn't stay focused. I would have. Well, I don't want to say that, but I don't know how my uncles and my father stayed at the same place of work. I remember my one uncle, my uncle Vince. He's probably the smartest guy I ever knew. He made little tiny bolts every day
Hmm.
and loved it. Funniest guy I ever met, and I think he thought jokes while he was doing all this stuff. And every time I would tell him I passed another year of college or whatever, he would tell me. He said, sometimes you have to watch. The smarter you get, the more unhappy you can become.
Hmm.
And, because I think he had to justify what he was doing. And even though he was making these bolts, he was still making everybody laugh. And he was always the comic. And it really taught me a lesson that everybody wants to feel valued. And if you're going to feel valued for yourself, make sure it's something that you want to do. And if there's no one thing you want to do, then be a few things. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, very, very well said. As you're telling your story, to me, it really comes back to some of the conversation we were having earlier. You are really good at wrapping your decisions around a deep sense of why, like a deep sense of purpose. And when it comes to your commentary around career and so forth, the thing that stood out for me is that at the end of the day, if we're going to be driven by purpose, it has to be a purpose that aligns to our values. And at the end of the day, when it comes to success and defining success, success means something different for everybody defines success differently. And I think you're right. I think a lot of folks, and perhaps some of the unhappiness that folks start to feel as they start to grow in their career, and this sense of responsibility that they have to sort of that you undoubtedly or inevitably get burdened with, um, can can you you have the power to make the decision in your career to go in a different trajectory. And just because, to your point, you the next step for you may mean more money, or it may mean more influence, or whatever. It may also mean more unhappiness. And so being grounded in what you call success, if you're the kind of person that success to you is work-life balance and being able to go to all of the baseball games and the soccer games and the band performances and everything, then that's success. And make decisions that align with those values.
I agree with you, Sean. I think that I learned that back in the Western PA days, Western Pennsylvania, where people worked in the mills. They had tough jobs, but they still figured out a way to be at the ball game, to be at the band practice, to be at the play, to be there with their wives for events
Yeah.
that were social, and it was expected that husbands and wives, or however you're pairing these days, right?
Hmm.
It was just the way it was,
Yeah.
and people took a lot of pain and made sure it happened.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
I think that that's the balance,
Hmm.
and it doesn't matter who you're paired with. To me, it doesn't matter who whether you have children or not.
Right.
It's just a matter that to be there
Hmm.
and to be a parent so that
Yep.
you're just a parent, not being a parent, but APPARENT, that a parent that you're there.
Right. No kidding.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about success, and I sort of couple the idea of success with longevity. Because at the end of the day, sure, we want to be successful, we want to be happy, and so forth, but we also want to we want to live as long as we can to continue to make an impact in the world and to share wonderful experiences with our loved ones and so forth. So when it comes to things like, we talked earlier about getting your workout in today and so forth. Are there daily habits or routines that support your own physical and mental well-being?
Yes. I could tell you that it always hasn't been that way.
Hmm.
I'm one that learned the hard way. There was a point in time, I think, when, um, I'm in my upper 60s now, but in my 40s and 50s, where I was spending so much time with work that I wasn't thinking as much about exercise and eating right and things of that
Hmm.
sort. And it was probably when I was around 55 that I decided, I was going to lose a lot of weight, and I actually lost 80 pounds. And
That's amazing. 80
yeah,
pounds.
it was
Wow.
very successful. It was with an organization that they actually put me on TV. They were I was on
Wow.
commercials
Really?
twice a day for 3 years. And it really got to the point
Wow.
where when I would walk into a restaurant or walk into a store, people were like, "I know you from somewhere." I'm like, "Yeah, I was the fat guy on the TV
Oh my
commercial."
gosh.
So,
Wow.
but I lost a lot of weight,
Hmm.
and of course, I kept up my exercise at that point, thinking, this is the way to go.
Hmm.
And sure enough, it was 6 years ago that I'm at the rec center in Westerville working out, and I lost my breath. I couldn't breathe, and I literally jumped in my car and drove over to COPC, which was my employer at the time. I knew all
Right.
the docs, and I said, "Hey, I got a problem here."
Hmm.
They're like, "Well, let's test your heart," and I'm like, "Can't be my heart. It's breathing. It's." And they know what they're talking about. So sure enough, I underwent, some major surgery
Okay.
on my heart, and um, and I was so upset. I told the doctor, I said, "How can this be that? Okay, sure, I was overweight. I lost 80 pounds. I'm in great shape now, working out and all that." And the doctor said, "You never know, what kind of debt you carry with you, either from your hereditary, from your previous grandparents, parents who may have had issues. And when you lost all that weight, you're still not sure everything cleared up. You may have had a situation, maybe some beginning of blockages occurring or something like that. Just because you lost all that weight doesn't mean that that all went away. So those are the things that
Yeah.
it was an eye opener for me because I thought I did perfectly well, but there is no perfect. The only perfect is if you start as a kid and just stay fit in every way. And
Yeah.
and and now, of course, these days it seems like we all have at least one relative that's got the mental thing with the Alzheimer's and things like that, and we do too.
Yep.
And so now it's how do we stay on top of things mentally? So these are top of mind and things that I meet with my doctor once every 6 months to
Hmm.
make sure that I'm doing what I should be doing. But the one thing certain, it sure doesn't hurt if you are eating well and exercising regularly.
Right.
So part of my this uh, what we called retirement, what I call really just going to more of a 4 to 6 hours a day. It gives me another couple of hours to spend at the gym.
There you go.
So so that's what it's not like I'm gonna be going out to the bars or anything like that. I'm gonna be, at the rec center and also playing my newfound love pickleball.
Oh,
So
nice. Yes.
yeah,
Oh,
love it.
yeah. That's the craze nowadays.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun.
So that's what I think, and I know that my family has all learned from me, especially when I went through the surgery and the issues there. So because they're all in really good shape.
Right.
So
Do you prefer when you go to the gym to do exercise, aside from doing pickleball, do you prefer cardio? Do you lift weights?
you know, I'm not as big a weightlifter as
Hmm.
maybe I should be. I do you know running and on the ecliptic, what do they call the ellipticals,
Hmm.
and I like to play basketball.
Oh,
So
wow. Excellent.
and I'm usually the oldest guy on the court,
Good for you. That is
which is
awesome.
sort of bragging because once I get beat, people are like, "Oh, gee." Well, then I say, "Well, I am this many
Hmm.
years old, so
Yeah.
I can always bring that up."
Hmm. I went through a fitness transformation myself back in 2014. I didn't lose 80 pounds, but I lost 70 pounds, and that experience for me was absolutely life changing. And if there's one thing I'll say about your story, and again, I'm really inspired by how often you wrap your story around the why, and I think that there's a really important lesson to what you just said. I think a powerful motivator for getting to the gym on a regular basis is having a sport. Like having a sport like pickleball is a way to help you to stay motivated because then you can kind of embed it in your head. Hey, it's not, because let's face it, there are times when it can be difficult to stay motivated because you want to avoid heart blockage or whatever. It's just we're not good as humans of doing something today that's going to give us benefit 20 years down the road or 5 years or
Right.
whatever the case may be. Having a sport is a way to short circuit that. It really provides this purpose around why you're going to go, and so it can be a very 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 powerful motivator.
I agree. I agree. And you think about it, this is the time when you've got the perfect excuse because it's colder than heck outside,
Very true.
right? And so it was sort of funny. I think it was it Monday or Wednesday? I The alarm went off and I told my wife, I said, "It's too cold to get out of bed." I think that was the morning it was 6 degrees.
Hmm.
And she said, "You'll feel sorry about it later. Go."
There you go.
And you know what? I didn't even hesitate. I just jumped right out of bed, put my clothes on, and left
Yeah,
because it was like, that was right. So, had she not been there, at that time, um, I probably would have rolled over and gone back to sleep. So sometimes you need a nudge.
that's true. Had she not been there to inspire you and to
Yeah.
remind you, yeah, that's
Well, and
really well
she's
said.
she's really good at she exercises every day.
Yeah, that's awesome.
She does the things that I haven't yet gotten into, Pilates and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff.
Well, and to your point, as we sort of change direction from a conversation perspective, when we start talking about leadership, I think this is a really great segue. There's nothing more, in my opinion, leadership that is born out of walking the walk, demonstrating those things is the most powerful form of leadership. You know, so so yeah, excellent. So one of the things that has been sort of a theme that as we've sort of talked today is mentorship and the importance of connectivity with the community and mentoring and coaching others and so forth. And Angelo, you've been a mentor to so many throughout your career, including myself. And I got to maybe I'll just take this moment right now to say thank you for being a mentor to me. You've spent time with me. We've had lunch at the Polaris Grill, and you've shared with me some of your stories. And and I know you've done this with many other people. I've had many conversations with folks in the community that have also been inspired by not just your story and so forth, but your willingness to share with others and to mentors. So, could you maybe take a moment and talk a little bit about mentoring and maybe share a story about a mentorship experience that shaped you or someone that you guided?
Um, well, thank you, Sean. That's very nice to say. I enjoy talking with you every time we get together. I think that I have a genuine like of sitting down and talking with people, especially if they feel, gosh, I've got a really difficult situation here.
Right.
And if they're willing to share that with me, and that's what this young gentleman I spoke with this morning, I could just see in his face that it was like the end of the world. And I'm thinking, you'll be over it, in a month. It's sort of
Hmm.
like the old thing your mom used to say that, well, if it's still hurting, you know, 6 months from now, it's a problem. But if it's not a problem, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think that I have always been around people that were willing to share with me. And I think that that's probably where it started. I never had people that would turn their back because that would be the only reason I think anybody would have the excuse not to help mentor.
Yeah.
Because, it's words. It's, can you allocate a half hour? Can you, sit
Yeah.
down for lunch for an hour? Come on, this isn't you're not digging a ditch. You're not, it's not like something made. This is just a discussion.
Right.
And all you're doing is sharing your personal best practices
Hmm.
with somebody else who had the willingness to come to you and say, "Hey, what do you think?"
Right.
And that to me is so meaningful. It's so important
Yeah.
because um, I think it's so easy to respond to,
Hmm.
but it's so important for someone to make their way to your trail and say, "Hey, Sean, can you listen to this?"
Right.
Just like this young gentleman today said, you know, Accenture or small shop. To him, it was just, in the way of
Hmm.
life. And
Yeah.
what am I going to do? And I think you don't always have to say, here's the answer.
Hmm.
But many times sharing what you've done in those kind of situations, sort of what
Yeah.
you've been asking, that's usually all it takes.
Hmm.
Because, you know, by you saying, do this, that might not be the right answer.
Right. Absolutely. Because again, going back to our previous conversation, you're deeply driven by purpose. And I would imagine your dialogue with him would have been around helping him to understand that, this decision, and you're right, at the end of the day, maybe the decision isn't even that big of a decision. Who knows? But that kind of a decision should be born out of what are your values, what are the things that are the most important to you, and which of those opportunities align the best to where you're at in your life and your values and where you want to go.
I think you're right on. I had so many stories related to this in the classroom, having taught so many years.
Right.
And some of the best stories, one young lady, I thought she was the best student I ever had. And she, um, confronted me and said, "Why do you think no one will hire me?"
Hmm.
And I said, "I don't know." I said, "Let's sit down and talk." And as it turned out, she was still impressive as when she was in my class. And I don't know why she wasn't, but I know this. And we still live in a world where people are going to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But this person sort of dressed in a minority way,
Mm-hmm.
and it was apparent, like I'm of Italian heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So if I would come in dressed of an Italian heritage, you would be sort of clear to see, oh, this guy must be Italian or whatever. And I also knew a person that had the need for someone of her skill.
Mm-hmm.
And, she interviewed with them and got the job on the spot.
Hmm.
And I have no idea if the clothes had anything to do with it. I think it did, because
Wow.
otherwise you'd be crazy not to hire. And I do think you have to be aware that, like, we're all that way, right? If you'd walk in with your T-shirt for an interview, don't know if everybody would buy off, right?
Right.
And there are folks who don't treat everyone equally.
Yeah.
Um, so sure enough, um, those things happen. But I think that during the course, and I figured out one time, because I kept all my class lists, I had over 3,000 students over the years, and then that doesn't include the um, leadership technology thing that we had put together with Maureen Metcalf and Ben and Steve and Mike and some others. Because if you counted those classes, there'd be even more. But 3,000, and I could tell you at least, each student's once um, per class,
Mm-hmm.
being over the course of 14 weeks, um, were coming saying, "Hey, can you sort of review my best practice thoughts? Because here's what I'm thinking."
Right.
So, so I think it's very important to spend that time. That's the stuff that comes back and pays for itself later.
I agree. I agree with you 100%. That's part of my favorite part of doing these podcasts. Recently, I sat down and talked with Connie Matthews Reynolds, who's very well known in the community, as you know, and she shared a very very impactful story about early on in her career where she overheard her boss talking about and criticizing her because of her weight, and talk about a story of resilience where she turned that situation around and turned it into a tremendously positive story of empowerment for herself. And so, if you haven't heard that or other folks haven't heard that interview, it really is very, very good. Because
But
you're
I
right.
think the world of Connie. I think
Oh,
she's fantastic.
yeah, yeah, she is. She's seriously the best. So, speaking of, inspiring others and so forth, how do you think about, inspiring others, especially like in challenging or transformative times?
I find myself presenting a bigger picture. And, it seems like if you're older than the person, like I was older than this gentleman today, I can present a picture that perhaps he hasn't yet gotten to because he's so young.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think it's always more difficult if someone who is more experienced or older than you who asks for your opinion.
Right.
Because I think you first sit there saying, "Gosh, this guy, has so much more experience than me. How is you sort of get caught up in yourself."
Mhm.
Whereas, today I just right away jumped into, well, here's what I remember going through when I was trying to decide, you know, go to Accenture or stick with NC Group, little company. And
Mhm.
here's what I was thinking.
Right.
And there were pluses, there were minuses, and but so I shared that with him.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best thing we can do is
100%.
maybe give our own best practices over to somebody and um, leave it at that. Don't
Mhm.
always try to give them the answer. Try to show them the process you went through,
Right. Yeah. Very well
and
said.
and and that and maybe that gets to the why.
Yeah. I love it. So let's pivot the conversation a bit and talk tech. And I'm really curious. We've talked quite a bit about how changing technology, and you've been on the forefront of amazing technological transformations over the years, with Y2K and the internet and everything. And now we've got AI and so forth and other technologies, cloud computing, etc. I'm curious, what excites you most about the future of technology? And, do you have concerns as we continue to innovate?
I think that's a great question. Um, I do have concerns. I think the greatest positives about it all is that for every technological change we've had, I think it's made us better.
Hmm.
But whether we talk about the internet, whether we talk about even what we learned from 9/11, each of these difficult things we had to go through, we really learned how to make sure that things were happening well. And I think that I have been exposed, and I remember when I went to college, my minor was in computer science, and we had to learn like 10 different languages. It was bizarre, APL and all these different Fortran and all these different
Hmm.
programming languages.
Sure.
And then, we all graduated and all the corporate America was using for the most part was COBOL. And
Sure.
that was the technology we had to deal with. But bigger things, because I think when we all started, we thought programming was all there was. Very few were involved in the infrastructure and other things. So I think that as we got the ability to ride the internet, and as we got the ability to do other cool things, um, that's the way I think of with AI. I do understand that every time we've had something good and major come out, that there's this group of bad guys, right, that go after some of the vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
And, that's where, you know, as a CISO and a CIO, I always took that stuff very seriously.
Hmm.
Made sure that I had a process of rotating vulnerability and penetration tests organizations through about every 6 months.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't, I'd use different organizations. They weren't the same ones because many times the same ones would come back with the same answers. So um, I found that, and luckily, sitting on, a million patient records and things of that sort, we never had a breach. So, um, and we've heard of other bad things that have happened in our community and in the world. But I
Yeah.
think that we need to strive. And I mentioned to you that we put together a John Farhat and I put together a group of about 50 people now that we meet every other week and talk about AI. And the first thing we talked about was what needs to be some of the stop signs and crossroads and things of that sort. And I remember identifying in the first couple of weeks we were together, and we've since published about 7 papers through CDO magazine, through Steve Wanamaker's group.
Right.
And and what those talk about have to do with uh, like with deep fake. It should be um, transparent
Agreed.
that something that went through an AI engine went through an AI engine,
Precisely. Yeah.
so that you know.
Yeah.
Today you don't. I mean, we're still in archaic times with AI. So,
Yeah.
I've been around new technology long enough to know that you go through what I call the archaic times because it takes a while for us as humans to catch up.
Very, very true.
Right? We snap the new tech in, and boom, there it is. It's working. It's great. And all the whiz kids are like, wow, right? And then us sort of business oriented people are saying, well, wait, isn't that going to be an issue?
Right.
So that's where we are right now with that technology. But I think in the long in the long haul, it's going to enable us to do so much more.
I agree.
It's just fascinating
Yeah.
to think of what they can be doing. I'm a big hockey fan. Our family's a big hockey
Hmm.
family. We go to the Blue Jackets games, and my
Awesome.
wife and I somehow won a trip to the Penguins
Ah.
versus the Blue Jackets last Tuesday.
Oh, that
So
had to be rough.
we were
Were you rooting for the Blue Jackets, or
oh yeah, yeah, we
you're not
root
a
for the Blue Jackets,
yeah.
even though I'm from that area.
Yeah.
But we were on this bus, and we get over there, and every Blue Jackets game, when they when the cameras show a person in the audience, it's that person.
Mhm.
In Pittsburgh, they would zero in on, say, a picture of me. I'm
Mhm.
sitting here like this, and all of a sudden they would transform that person into the devil or into
Wow.
a creature.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I saw AI being used
Mhm.
at a professional sports
Wow.
event.
That's incredible.
I was just blown away that
Yeah.
Pittsburgh was doing that.
Yeah. Wow. That's
And
awesome.
and the crowd was going crazy because
I
they
bet.
thought that was cool.
I bet.
Well, and as long as it stays clean, it is cool. But as
Mhm.
soon as the wrong people get their hands on it, and people are used in a way that they don't want to be. Like, what if they were to zero in on a police officer and show him as a bad guy?
Right.
You know,
Yep.
because it's going to cause an image problem and things like that. So,
Well, and you get the wrong person looking at that and thinking that it's real.
yes,
That can cause problems. I mean, there are safety concerns that arise, with police officers or whoever, in that kind of a
yes,
situation. And I agree with you, in AI in particular, and it's certainly not, it does it's not just with AI. It certainly is a more sort of universal kind of a thing relative to technology. But when technology changes and we have a big technology innovation or advancement, it just takes us time as humans it takes time for the regulatory landscape to catch up. But I do really think that there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying. I do, and I agree with you that the answer is transparency and
yeah,
making sure that folks understand not only on the output of AI, that these are the outputs of an artificial intelligence, and making sure that when it ends up in the media or on video or whatever, that it's clearly labeled. But I think transparency on the input side as well, giving us transparency in terms of the data that goes into training these models, so we can ascertain and make sure that that data is reflective of our values as a society, and that things like bias and misinformation and so forth are removed, so the AI is can be more beneficial to society.
I agree 100%. And maybe this is another example where when AI came out um, about a year ago, that's when we created our little group. and it's called the Artificial Intelligence Freedom Alliance, and we just came up with that name, sitting, and we've got CIOs to developers to CISOs to, they're all over the board. So it's unlike the CIO forum where you had to be the head of tech.
Hmm.
Um, and we're just teaching each other a lot. And so
Yeah.
I like the idea. What I've been able to do with technology and in the kind of role I've been in is empower myself.
Right.
Um, I'm never going to sit back and say, wow, where the heck is that technology going? So getting people even beyond people in my company, outside of my company, and pulling together a group who are interested in that, that's the easiest way to solve most problems
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
putting, think about it. If there's 50 people, that means there's 50 people, probably equal or greater my brain power, then we're all sitting together trying to figure this out.
Hmm.
That's so much easier than doing it myself.
I
So
agree. I agree.
so
You know what
so
that
that's where
that reminds me of a saying that actually came from Ben Blankera. I don't know if it's his original, but I certainly attribute it to him. He says, "Alone we can go fast. Together we can go far."
yeah,
That's what that reminds me of.
that is that is so true. That's like, because Ben, if I turn the camera, his condo is right across the street here,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I remember my favorite saying was the role of a CIO could be the loneliest role in the world
Wow.
if you let it
Okay.
be.
If you let it be. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's where I think those are results of discussions we've had. Ben and I have worked at two companies together, and then when he was Tech Columbus and I was dispatch, we did a lot together. So
Mhm.
I can't. There are people in our community you just can't say enough about.
Agreed.
So we're really blessed.
We are. You're absolutely right. Well, Angela, I really want to be respectful of your time. We've literally been talking for almost 2 hours, and I
Well,
as
that's two
much as
more. We can do
as I was
two.
going to say, I could sit here and talk all day long, but I know you've got better things to do than to sit here and talk with me all day long. So, just to wrap up, I really wanted to thank you for sharing your journey and your insights and your wisdom with us today. Your career is an inspiration, and I would say your dedication to mentorship and community building, innovation, your passion around, leading with purpose and finding the why and so forth. All of this just leaves an indelible mark on the Silicon Heartland, our listeners, and beyond. So thank
Well,
you.
thank
So,
you, Sean. That's
yeah,
very nice.
yeah,
I've enjoyed this,
awesome. I'm so glad to hear
and I
that.
think it's great that you do this too.
Thank you, thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, if you'd like to learn more about Angelo and the amazing work that he's doing in the community, you can find him on LinkedIn, where he stays actively involved. And for our listeners, I really hope today's episode, I'm sure that it has left you inspired and full of ideas to carry into your work and life. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to Silicon Heartland Sessions podcast and share it with others. We've got more amazing stories from leaders like Angelo coming your way. So thank you for listening. And until next time, keep building, keep collaborating, and keep making an impact. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Angelo.
Thank you, Sean.